Hello and welcome to the Bestseller Experiment, where we continue to discover what makes a bestseller and inspire you to start, finish and publish your book. I'm Mark DeVoe.
And I'm Mark State, and as always, a huge thank you to everyone who keeps this show on the road by supporting us with a little bit of cash. If you come to bestsellerexperiment.com/support, you can support the podcast and you get tons of extra stuff. If you become a chart topper supporter on Patreon, for example, you get access to over 130 deep dive episodes. I know that because I had to count them recently for a thing. And and we've done, because we had someone in the BXP group the other day say, has there been a deep dive on websites, author website? Yes, there has. Just go to the Bestseller Experiment website.com and there's a search thing there. If you put websites, it brings up the deep dive that we did with Simon at Bookswarm on websites and what makes a great website. We've had episodes on SEO, search engine optimization recently. We had a brilliant episode with Tim Lott about his new book on how to write a novel, which is one of these. When it started out, I thought, is Tim going to give me a hard time? Is this going to be difficult? But he was fantastic. He was so funny. We've had such great feedback on that. 130 episodes. That's more than most other podcasts, frankly.
I was going to say, I was thinking, hang on a minute, most podcasts last about 6 episodes.
Exactly.
Absolutely bonkers. You don't know what you're missing out on, folks. If you haven't
check it out. Go
and have a look at the website.
And then you got the Academy, where you get me and Mr. D as your, tutors. So links in the show notes. Just Google it, look us up. It's all good. Support us, and we can keep this show on the road. Thank you. Ad over.
Do you know? When you said "and then," it reminded me of one of my favourite moments in a movie. Have you ever seen the movie "Dude, Where's My Car"?
That one's passed me by.
Oh, okay. Silly film. It's kind of like it. But I tell you what, there's a moment where these two guys, the dudes, funny enough, in their car, they drive up to a fast food outlet, a Chinese takeaway fast food outlet,
right.
and they ask her a couple of things, and the lady goes, "And then," and they're like, no, that's it. And it's, and then you've got to watch it. Anyone who's seen it will know I was crying with laughter, as I was, Mark, on Father's Day. Happy Father's Day, by the way, Mark, for last weekend.
Yes, and to you.
I was crying with laughter on a viral video. I'll just say this. If you haven't seen it, go watch it. Type in shampoo prank Hulk in YouTube. Do it after the podcast. Just watch that. If you need a laugh today, just watch this. It is the funniest thing I've seen. I was literally doubling up. I was crying, laughing, and it was brilliant. Because you, Mark, you have to watch it after. Well, I'll show it to you after the podcast. It's brilliant. This is how you pass the summer evenings now. This is how I pass. This is how I pass Father's Day, lying in bed on a Sunday morning, waiting for the kids for the breakfast, which didn't arrive. I'm like, having older kids sucks on Father's Day, Mark.
Yeah, we're up because of our bladders. We're up before they are. It's.
Do you know, I was telling someone in Canada the other day about that BBC series called Grumpy Old Men, and
needs to come back, doesn't it? Needs to come back.
We could come back. We could do the podcast.
We're about positive vibes, man. We are about positive vibes.
We are positive. We are about positive. And actually, we're here to cheer you up this week, folks. There's a lot of heavy stuff going on in the world. So if you've joined us for a little bit of escapism, if you've joined us for a little bit of escapism, or maybe you've joined us because you need your weekly dose of inspiration, that's what we're going to deliver today. We've got a great interview, and we just want to continually uplift your spirits, because we know that writing can be a real challenge. It can be really hard work. Other times it can be the most amazing thing in the world. So if you're struggling this week, stick with us, because by the end of this episode, we're going to hope that you leave happier than you came in.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be honest, like a lot of people at the moment, I'm stony broke, and there's a WGA strike, and I've got all these scripts that I can't really sell to anyone. And, everyone in publishing who owes me money has paid me. I know, because I've asked my agent, it's like, does anyone owe us money? We managed to squeeze like 71 quid out of Unbound, so it's like, that's it. So, I'm kind of, but what I've been doing, rather than just sitting here inside with a bag on my head, I have been I've been just booking calls with other writers just to say, hey, you up for a chat? You up for a 10-minute chat, whatever. And it's interesting. One of them already has opened the doors to something that might be happening, and it's so I've just been reaching out to people just for a conversation, just to say, okay, so if you're one of these writers thinking, why the hell has Mark suddenly contacted me out of the blue after like 18 months of never speaking to me? That's why, because I just think, I can sit inside under that desk with a bag on my head wondering about interest rates and where the world is going, or I can get talking to other people and maybe see, what's happening in the world, how I can help them, how they can help me, or just for a chat, just to make a bit of human contact.
Reconnect. Yeah. Folks, you do make your own luck in this world. That's what I've learned. There's ups and downs, all the cycles of good and bad times. And I was joking with Mark before the podcast that the last thing you want ups and downs, because the alternative is a flat line, and no one wants to be flatlining, right? It's not a good state of life. So the most important thing is to just hustle, get out there, get writing, write it out. It probably actually, weirdly enough, if people are struggling right now with things that are going on in the world, you might actually do your best ever writing. Like it worked for Adele. She broke up with her longtime boyfriend, and what did she do off the back of it as revenge? She wrote her first album. Well, look where that got her. You just never know. You just never know.
That's the Bill Bailey joke, isn't it? Bill Bailey did a joke about Adele. He said, "This is the new Adele song. You broke up with me, but I'm not going to go on about it."
I'm just going to make a song about it and make millions off the back of it.
Exactly. Yeah,
and then can you imagine though? Can you imagine being that boyfriend that everywhere you go on the road, you just hear these breakups? I mean, that is the ultimate revenge. Brilliant. So just get writing, write it out, and let those emotions flow, folks. But Mark, we've got such a great interview. I think we should just dive straight in and talk about this week's guest.
A legend, a bit of a legend, I think. This is Katie Fforde. And now Katie Fforde, her debut novel, Living Dangerously, snapped up by a publisher before she'd even finished writing. It was published in 1995 when she was 42. That's 10 years after she first started trying, and she was finally a published author. Since then, she's written a further 29 novels, a collection of short stories and a quick read. Her books have sold over 4.5 million copies in the UK alone. Now, she credits the Romantic Novelists Association for helping her to finally launch her career. And she rose up through the organisation to become the RNA's fourth president. That's a position she's held now for over 10 years. In that time, she's founded the Katie Fforde Bursary to support aspiring romantic fiction authors. And just this year, in March 2023, she received their Lifetime Achievement Award. She's got a new novel this year as well called One Enchanted Evening, which was inspired by a cookery course she went on in the 70s. And it's the third in a trilogy of standalone novels set in the 60s, following three friends, Lizzie, Alexandra, and now with the new book, Meg. And I had a great chat with Katie. We talked about how she made time to read and write with a busy family life, what she learned for writing for Mills and Boon, and how the gift of a writing kit changed her life.
Fantastic. So let's dive in and listen to the phenomenal Katie Fforde.
Katie Fforde, welcome to the Bestseller Experiment. How are you today?
I'm very well, thank you, and very delighted to be on your podcast.
Well, what's taken us so long? That's the first question I've got, because you're an inspiration, absolute legend, and I know lots of our listeners are romance writers. Lots of our listeners are members of the RNA, and I know lots of our listeners will be fans of your books. And you've got a new one out, so let's start there. Let's talk about your new novel, One Enchanted Evening. Tell us about that.
Well, One Enchanted Evening is the third in a series. Apparently, if you call it a trilogy, you have to have a narrative arc that goes across all three books. And to be honest, if anyone says narrative arc to me, I come out in a rash because I'm not quite sure what it is. However, I've managed all this time without knowing, so we must be all right there. But basically, the story starts with a wedding in the country when three girls go to a cookery course in London. And I went on a course very, very similar to this. And the teacher of the course is very, very, very similar to my teacher. And she was French, but she had an English name. And she was very despising of British food and all that stuff. Only British food she approved of were Bramley apples. But anyway, three girls are all sent there or go there for different reasons. And Lizzie is sent there by her mother because her mother wants her to make a good marriage, by which that means somebody who's a member of her husband's golf club or would be eligible. And then there's Alexandra, who's an orphan and has been sent there by her guardians because they don't really know what to do with her. And then there's Meg, which is she's the heroine of One Enchanted Evening. She has gone there because she wants to learn to cook so she can go out and get a job cooking. When I joined my course, I was fed up with secretarial work and I wanted to do a course which would enable me to get jobs as a cook or just do something different. And so I was the sort of Meg character. But unlike Meg, I didn't have a mother I was trying to look out for. Meg and her mother are very close because her mother was a young widow and they've become very close, rather like Gilmore Girls or any of those sort of mother-daughter things. The women do become close to each other. And, you know, they're not quite like sisters, but they're a little bit like sisters. Yeah. And so Meg has always wanted to buy her mum somewhere to live so she's not dependent on live-in jobs. Because the disadvantage of a live-in job is that if your boss makes a pass at you and you have to leave, because in those days, that would have been your only alternative, you know, you wouldn't be able to, nothing else to do. And you would then have to leave your home as well. And Meg is fed up with her mother being in this position. And so she's determined and has been from a young age to earn enough money to get some sort of accommodation or at least put down a deposit. Although getting a mortgage in the 60s was not possible for women unless you had a man backing you.
Yes.
Just appalling.
I know. I was just about to say, you could have set this book right here and now, but then you said that and I thought, yeah, God, because you couldn't do it, could you? You had to have a man sign off on it. Good grief.
I know. It was just appalling. I mean, I remember my mother, it was maybe the 60s or the early 70s. My father was away from home as a teacher. And she wanted to get something on the HP hire purchase, yes, as it was called then. And she couldn't do it without his signature. And I think eventually they let her sign off on it. But she said, if they think that he ever remembers to pay a bill unless I remind him, honestly, you know, why is he getting the financial responsibility when it should be mine? And goodness me, we've all experienced things like that. Although I have to say my husband's very good and he does remember to pay the bills. But things were very different for women then.
Was that why you picked that particular period? Because as I understand it, the series is set in the 60s. So
yes,
because of, you know, the challenges facing women then. I mean, a lot of them aren't that different now, sadly. There are still different challenges, I guess. But that period appealed to you for that reason, did it?
It partly did. I mean, I could have set it in the 70s, except I think the 60s just sounds sexier and more fun. And it does have this image of modernness, you know, the mini skirts and lovely clothes and minis and music and everything, which is so much fun about it. But then when you look into it, it wasn't so, life for women wasn't so different from the 50s. But I thought it'd be fun to. Also, I just wanted to give myself a change of scenery, although, of course, a whole lot of problems as well. But it was fun. Once I'd got used to the idea of going back to the 60s, it was lovely. And I wrote the first one during lockdown. And it was bliss to be writing about somewhere where COVID really did not exist. And I could just hide away from the real world in my book world. It was lovely.
Now, you said this isn't a trilogy. But you've got this narrative art, whatever I'm going to call it the Katie Fforde literary universe, because you've got these three characters essentially living in the same world. Was it, I mean, a trilogy, you kind of have to read all three books in a certain order. With these three, can they be read in any order, or do they work as standalones? And if so, how did you manage that?
Well, they do work as standalones. I just wrote them as standalones. However, in the books 2 and 3, the characters from previous books do appear as characters. But I'm hoping the intention was that you could just read them as characters who are in the book without having to know their past histories. And if you do have to know their past histories, it's sort of referred to, so you sort of know where you are. But it was fun having those characters to add into the plot, because it was sort of like having old friends. I didn't have to create them from new. They were already ready-made, so to speak. And I really recommend doing a series, even if you can't manage a trilogy because of the narrative arc. Because you meet old friends, characters you become very fond of, and it's lovely to see them again and see how their lives progressed. I mean, it hasn't progressed massively in my case because it's only over sort of a 3-year period. But Lizzie in the first book is in one. I was going to say something that was a great big spoiler, so I sort of back off from that one. But she has progressed a little bit by the third book.
That's the problem with these narrative arcs, is spoilers ahoy.
Well, exactly.
You say it's only 3 years, but a lot can happen in those, as they do in the book. A lot does happen in these books. How are you keeping track of those characters? Is it just all up in your head, or are you using, some people use cards or spreadsheets or whatever? Did you have any kind of system for that?
No, the word system and me is basically an oxymoron. I'm not good at any of that. I have friends, dear friends, who I love, who have spreadsheets, and they know exactly where every character is at any given time. I sort of know, and I sort of remember, and if I don't remember, I have to read it and check back. But basically, it's all in my head. I do make notes of. I have a piece of paper with some things written on it, but I've usually lost the bit of paper by the time I need to refer to it, and so. I do work in this awful, awful, disorganized mess. I'm a terribly bad example. If they'd known what I was like, they would never have let me be president.
Well, we'll come to that in a minute. But you're clearly doing something right, because I think we're up to 29 novels now, 4.5 million copies sold in the UK alone. Let's go back to where it all started, because as I understand it, you and your husband, you started a business and you became addicted to Mills and Boon. Tell us about how it all began.
Well, yes, I did become addicted to Mills and Boon. And while I wasn't so addicted when we were doing our business, we had a pair of narrowboats, which we operated as a hotel, that moved, and I did all the cooking. And Desmond was responsible for getting the boats from A to B. And we had a couple of crew to help us. And I did used to read Mills and Boon novels while I was on those trips, but I didn't have very much time for reading at all. Although I did also read Jane Eyre when we first started, and I had forgotten. I had read it earlier on, but I was so gripped by it. I kept standing there stirring things, holding my hand below so my guests could see I was stirring, but they couldn't see I was also reading, because I was quite addicted. But I really became addicted to Mills and Boon when we gave up our narrowboat hotel and bought a little farmhouse it was, but there was no farm attached apart from one field, when we lived in Wales. And Desmond used to go away to sea, and I was left with my babies. And I had eventually 2 babies, and they didn't sleep. And they didn't not sleep at the same time. So there was always somebody waking me up. So I was very tired. And I'm sure an awful lot of women all over the world will relate to that very tired thing when you've got children, especially little ones. But life was quite hard, and I was quite lonely when my husband wasn't there. So I used to read Mills and Boon novels. And the good thing about it is you could just read a really quick little bit, and it would just give you that little break from life, a little reward. You'd put the washing machine on and you'd have a little read. And then you'd take the washing out and you'd have a little read. And you'd either rocking a baby or feeding a baby. I used to read a lot while I was feeding. And I would just do it as a sort of keep me going thing. And I was addicted, though, because if I didn't have a little stash of these novels to read, I would feel anxious, which I think defines addiction.
Yes.
And actually, I mean, it could have been alcohol or chocolate or Valium. So I was lucky it was Mills and Boon novels. But as I became less tired, I realized that some of the books I was reading were really good, and some of them were really quite poor. And I'm really quite ashamed of saying what I'm going to say, but I will say it. I thought, well, maybe you could write one of the less good ones. But if I heard my children saying that their ambition was to write something that was, not good or something they didn't really admire, the less good ones, maybe you could bring yourself up to that standard, I would be absolutely appalled. But that's what I thought then. Because in my ignorance, I thought Mills and Boons must be easier to write than ordinary fiction, because they're only 50,000 words long, as opposed to 100, or even in those days, 150, when books were really fat. They're a lot thinner now, thank goodness, unlike the rest of us. They were really fat, and I thought it would be really difficult to write a normal novel as opposed to a Mills and Boon. And so once I'd started thinking that I would really quite like to write them, I read them with a slightly more critical eye. But it was a while before I started writing, and I didn't actually start writing until my mother, who'd obviously heard me talking about wanting to write a novel for long enough, gave me a writing kit for Christmas, which she made up herself. She assembled, there was a ream of paper. I think that's the only thing really we still use from that writing kit. But there was a thesaurus, which you'd have online now, and a little dictionary, which I still have in my drawer. Oh. And occasionally I do look at it just for old time's sake, because I've always been a dreadful speller. I'm actually quite dyslexic, but I didn't really discover that until later in life.
Right.
And there was Tipp-Ex, when it was little bits of paper, which you put this little bit of paper where you'd made your typing mistake, and then you'd type the wrong letter again, and it would go on the white, and that would wipe out that thing, and then you could retype. So there was Tipp-Ex. People why would they know about Tipp-Ex? I think they might know the painting on kind, which we still have, but I don't suppose they knew those little bits of paper, and pencils and pens, and it all came in a sort of file. And it was a bit of a shut up or put up moment.
Right.
And I had 3 small children at this time, an Irish wolfhound and 2 cats, and a husband who was away at sea a lot of the time. But actually, that was my advantage. Having the husband who was away at sea, it was good, because when he was home, he could stay with my daughter when she wouldn't stay at playgroup, which was always. She's such an independent person now. But at playgroup age, at 2, she was dependent. And so he would sort out that side of life. And while he was home, I would steal an hour away from being a wife and mother. And I gave up ironing, because that gave me a little time. And my cooking became a little less recipes and more a million ways with mince. I would just sort of start frying some onions, thinking, well, there must be something else I can make with this. And so the meals became a little bit scratchy. Some of them were fine, some of them weren't so good. But I would get my hour a day to write. And when I started writing, I realised this is what I'd been missing all my life. Right. Most of my life. Because when we first moved to Gloucestershire, where we live now, and still in the same house, I used to think, I've got everything. I've got a lovely husband. I've got my lovely children. I've got my lovely dog. And it's very beautiful around here. And I've got lots of friends. And it's all so nice. Why aren't I happy? Mm-hmm. And when I started writing, I became happy. And I was obviously missing that creative thing, that part of me which needed to be creative. And so once I started writing, my hour stretched. And if we were going out for the day, I would get up really early so I could get my hour in. And it soon became 2 hours. And then I would write at all weird times of the day. Like I'd go upstairs, in theory, to run the children a bath. Really, I'd put the taps on, nip in to wherever I was writing, depending which room it was, and write a little bit and pretend that I really wanted the bath to be that full when I finally came upstairs to have it. So, I was stealing the time to write, and I just loved it. But I will say it was easier for me because although I was busy with my children, I didn't have a job as well. And now I meet young women who've got children and a full-time job, and they still manage to write. And I really do take my hat off to them. I've got a dear friend, Jo Thomas, who's a wonderful writer, and she used to take her littlest to nursery. Her other 2 were at a she had 3 under 3 at a bigger nursery, and she'd take the baby to nursery, and then she'd drive her car around the corner, and she'd sit in her car and write rather than go home. Because the thing is, if you go home, then you start doing the chores.
Yes.
So she would steal that time that's how she found her time. So it is possible. But I do really take my hat off to those people who have full-time, engaging, busy jobs and a young family, and they still write their books.
Absolutely. Don't we all? Let's talk about the RNA, the Romantic Novelists Association, and the role that it played in your career. Because there were years of rejection, but it was quite a turning point for you, wasn't it? I think you met an agent at the RNA.
The RNA were hugely instrumental in starting my writing career, apart from anything else, because they kept me supported during the long years when Mills and Boon were saying, oh, this is so near, but it's not quite for us. Could you try and do this, this, and this, and this? And while I sort of became very inured to that, it was having them saying, you are a good writer. Come on, Katie, just keep going, which made a huge difference. And they had what was then known as the probationary scheme. We now call it the New Writers Scheme. And it's for unpublished writers. And you submit your unpublished novel to the scheme, and a published writer will read it and comment on it. And these comments are really very helpful. Well, one year, the organizer of this scheme was also a scout for an agent who was a new agent. She'd worked for a big publisher, and she was fed up with having to tell poor authors that they couldn't have an extra £100 added onto their contract, which she knew perfectly well her publisher could afford. And she wanted to work for the fox, not the gamekeeper. I think is probably the expression. And so she was new. She didn't have any clients. And so Dr. Hilary Johnson, who is, I'm not sure she's still doing it now, actually, was a book doctor. When people would send their manuscripts and she would sort them out. She used to have some very famous clients and sort them out. Anyway, she was in charge of the New Writers Scheme, and so had read one of my books, because to be honest, latterly, my books, they tended to say, this is great, something else needs to happen to it. But it was sort of always close, but no cigar. But anyway, Hilary read it this particular year, and she was a scout for this agent. And she had asked me, Hilary had said, oh, could I have another copy of your book, please? Because I can't remember what reason she gave. She didn't tell me. And I didn't question it. I just said, oh, okay, here you are. And although it took ages to print them out in those days, because we had paper with perforated edges and printers with sort of wheel. You're far too young.
No, I remember those, the old dot matrix printers. I remember those very, very well. Yeah, very, very
And when
well.
you pulled off the bits, your manuscripts had sort of furry edges.
Yes.
Anyway, she sent this off to Sarah Malloy, who liked it enough to want to meet me. And so I went up to London to meet her, absolutely in fear and trembling, because I worked in a whole food cafe. I didn't have a high-powered job by any stretch. And we had a chat, and Sarah said, well, send me the first 100 pages by the end of the year. Well, this was in the spring. I thought, well, I'm not going to send 100 pages because that's half a book. I'm not going to risk writing so much if it's not the right thing. And I'm going to do it now. So I wrote, we'd had a little discuss. She had said, oh, can you bring a sort of 10-page synopsis? And I thought, oh, my goodness, that's an awful lot. So I set my computer on triple spacing. So they're really far apart. The lines are really far apart. And I cobbled together about 3 pages. Anyway, I didn't have a proper synopsis, but I had some ideas, and we talked about it a bit. And we had a lovely chat, and she said, don't forget we like jokes. Well, I don't think Mills and Boon in those days did terribly like jokes. And if they did, they didn't like them to be at the expense of the hero, which was a bit disappointing, really, because, if you like making jokes, who do you make them at the expense of? Obviously, the one you love. Well, not necessarily, but in my particular case. So off I went, and I wrote her one chapter, and I sent it off. And I didn't hear back immediately. I had to wait about a fortnight. And she said, first of all, I'm so sorry for the long delay in getting back to you. I thought, what long delay? From Mills and Boon in those days, people had waited up to a year to have their books sent back to them. And it's not because Mills and Boon didn't try terribly hard, but they just had so many submissions. Yes. And so that was nothing. I thought she's come back to me far too quickly. In fact, we were on holiday, and I had to get the person who was living in my house looking after my Irish Wolfhound to open the letter and read it to me. And we were camping, and we were in this campsite club. And I sit there putting 20p's into a phone box, trying to hear over the noise of all these people drinking and having a good time around me, trying to make sense of what my friend was saying. But I realized it was good news. But I almost wanted to go back there and then and not even have the rest of the holiday, because I wanted to go and see the letter for myself. But she was very, very nice about it. But she said, no, your first chapter needs to be 2 chapters. And so I had, padded them out, but I made it longer, sent her them back, and she said, oh, fine, now send me the next bit. So I sent it to her in chunks. And there was the time when she used to ring me up and tell me what she thought, which was fine. Except sometimes I thought, has she got nothing else to do? I've only got set this off. How can she have read it and be ringing me already? Because I would have liked a little breathing, little time off. But no. She was very, very efficient and very on the case, which actually is brilliant and what you want in an agent. But there was this time when she rang me up and she said, well, there was a very long pause. And then she said, linen sheets. And I thought, linen sheets, oh my goodness. Oh, there's some sort of no, because I had sent her a sex scene, which I wasn't expecting to happen quite when it did. I was expecting the sex scene to come at the end, which is where the proper place is for sex in a novel, I thought, in my when I was naive. And anyway, it had come up earlier, so to speak, and I put linen sheets in it. And I thought, is there a sort of no about linen sheets? This is something I've done wrong. It took me minutes to find out whether she'd liked it or not. Fortunately, she had. It was okay. And so I could carry on writing the book. And she very brilliantly found me, there were 2 publishers who both wanted it before I'd finished the book, which after 8 years, this sounds like a overnight success story until you realize that I'd been trying to write for Mills and Boon for 8 years before this happy day, when I stopped writing for Mills and Boon and actually wrote something that suited me better. I think really with the Mills and Boon, I was trying to fit myself into a size 10 dress when really I was a size 16. And I think that is what it was. I couldn't quite squash myself into the space, but I learnt so much from writing those Mills and Boon novels that I'm eternally grateful to them. And I really do think that one of the reasons I've managed to keep it going is because I learnt so much from those early books. You have to keep on the point all the time. You can have secondary characters when you're not writing for Mills and Boon. And I thought, oh, well, this will be bliss. I've got all this space now. And then I thought, oh gosh, this is scary. I've got all this space. Yes. And I didn't know what I was doing. Well, I'd learned what I was doing with the Mills and Boon, even though not well enough. But it kept, I do understand now about having to keep the plot going, keep the page turning. Don't let yourself drift off to describe some pretty something or other, or a comical secondary character who doesn't actually move the plot along. I learned that you need to keep the plot moving. And so I put the fact that I've managed to go on from that first book, and I think it's 30 books now, and I actually like to add in the 2 Christmas anthologies, because and I did a quick read. So it's a few books. And I feel I learned so much from all those failed Mills and Boon attempts. So I'm eternally grateful to them, and will always credit them with teaching me so much about writing.
Now, apologies if I missed this, but What was the comment about linen sheets about?
Well, I had had my couple making love on linen sheets. And I had obviously mentioned that the sheets were linen because my hero naturally was immensely wealthy and lived in this amazing house. Although he had his other problems. But I didn't know whether I shouldn't, people didn't like linen sheets. Maybe, they were considered too, I don't know, old-fashioned or wrong or, difficult to look after, whatever, because they would be very difficult to look after if you had linen sheets. The ironing would be hell. But it just took, she was just so long breathing, saying, well, and then you just didn't know, just waiting for the sword of Damocles to drop. But they were actually considered to be okay. And I haven't had linen sheets again, I don't think. But I feel if I had to, I would feel confident that it's okay to have them.
Very good. Very good. Let's talk about your work at the RNA, because you were chair at the RNA 2009 to 2011, and you've been president since 2011. You founded a bursary. You sponsored the debut Romantic Novel Award, and congratulations! Just this month of recording, we're recording this in March, you received the Lifetime Achievement Award. So you've played a core role in the RNA. How has romance fiction evolved in your tenure there? What big changes have you seen?
I think the biggest change that I've seen, and I was on the committee for years before I was chair, because I always said I wouldn't be chair, and then I left the committee for a bit and then was asked to come back on, is the number of publishers there are now. They were different publishers. There were quite a lot of publishers when I first started, but the smaller ones were beginning to fall away. And so there weren't so many publishers. Now there are many publishers. And of course, there is the option of becoming an independent publisher or self-publishing, which when I first started was considered very much a no-no. There were always people who, for about £5,000, which was an awful lot of money in those days, would publish your book and would put it in beautiful leather, gold-tooled covers. And if you were going to make money selling them, you'd have to sell them for about £50 each. So really not a good idea. And that was very much frowned on. And now people do write really, really good books and produce them themselves, sell them themselves, and take all the money. I don't think it would suit me, because I think I'd find it very difficult to actually sell the books, as well as I wouldn't really want to do without an editor either, or any of the people who help me. But it's a perfectly viable proposition, and it's no longer frowned on. And I think that's the biggest change. But also there's far more people writing the sort of books that I write now. When I first started, there weren't many of us. There was me, and there was people like Julie Cooper, but she was so big and different in sales terms that her books I can't really compare her to me. And there was Jill Mansell and a few others, but there really weren't very many. And so we sort of had the field to ourselves. But now there are very many more writers, and actually it's terrific, because there's lots more opportunities for people to have their work read and assessed by the public, which is the only critics that matter really are the people who buy the books. If they don't buy the books, it doesn't really matter how brilliant your books are, because no one will ever know. So that's changed. But as I say, I think that's a good thing. In fact, I think it's all good, really. I sort of miss guarantee being in the top 10 with every book that I produced, because there weren't so many people writing what I write. There certainly wasn't TikTok, who back writers in a way nothing else does, and maddens the publishing world because they can't control it.
Yes.
And part of me would love it if my books reigned supreme and I didn't have to compete with people on TikTok. But actually, that's a jolly good thing, that independent, ordinary people can have, spread the word about books they love and those books to do really well because of it. So, as I say, part of me wishes it wasn't so. The other part is saying, jolly good on you, and, crack on.
And just looking to the future with romance fiction as well, are there any particular challenges? I mean, publishing as a whole, with, as you say, social media plays a key role. There are big conversations about authenticity, diversity, artificial intelligence, all these things. I guess these are challenges for the romance genre too, aren't they?
Yes. I mean, there are always challenges for the romance genre because it's always been despised. It's sort of, I don't know why, crime is respected and romantic fiction isn't. And I don't really know why one is and one isn't, because, one is something that we all, most of us experience, love and falling in love. And the other is something, if we're lucky, we don't ever experience. And so, although I also like to read crime, so I don't despise the genre at all, but I just don't know why we're not considered okay, and crime novelists, crime novels are. But we've always had this, and sometimes I think, this is awful, we should fight it. And other times I just think, I can't be bothered. It was ever thus, and I can be huffy all the way to the bank. Because, if your books sell well, it doesn't really matter what genre they're in. But I think in the future, there will be more ways of publishing books. And as you say, AI, which is a horrifying thought. Also, celebrities are asked to write books in a way that they weren't quite in the olden days. In the olden days, if you were a celebrity, you might write your life story and you might sell billions of it. But it's unlikely that you'd be asked to write a romantic novel and be helped to write it by other people. But now that's quite common. And these books do sell. And some of them are better than others. Some of them aren't so good. But people buy them and they like them. And because they want to buy a book with a famous name on the cover, there's nothing anyone can do about it. I'm always a bit grumpy with celebrities, though, who have their books out, because they get so much publicity, which an ordinary old writer like me couldn't get. We're not going to be invited onto Graham Norton because we've written a book, even if we've written it all ourselves, because we're not a famous name. But then, of course, there are the famous names who have written them all themselves, like Richard Osman, for example. But even he gets so much more publicity than a normal person would get because of his high profile on television. But on the other hand, we all do love him because, his books are jolly and he's a very nice chap. However, in my heart, I'm still a little bit jealous because of all the publicity.
Oh yeah, we could talk about this all afternoon. But let's talk about what's coming next from you, Katie. Now, I saw somewhere you went on a Ray Mears survival course. Will you be branching out into Andy McNab style adventure soon, or crime? I've heard you want to write cozy crime. Branching out at any point, or will it be romance all the way?
Well, to be honest, I did hear that Andy McNab didn't necessarily write all his books, but of course that may be a horrid, wicked rumour. But I won't be doing Andy McNab because, to be honest, the Ray Mears course I did was more involved in sort of making fires and plant life and making a shelter and making flames just using a sort of knifey thing. And all stuff like that. But making the shelter was fun. No, I won't be branching out too much. I would like to write a cozy crime because I like reading them. I find them soothing. I think a lot of people read them for that reason because sort of the world is put to rights. The evildoer is confounded and all is right with the world. But I don't think I could work out the plots. I don't think I've quite got the right sort of mind. Unless Richard Osman would like to do that bit for me, and then I'm sure we can make a great duo and sell billions. And my little 4.5 million could add to the 4.5 million that he sells every week. But I don't think I will be changing genre. I've already changed genre enough writing in the 60s, which, although it doesn't seem like much of a change in genre, did cause everyone to when I was going to stop writing, just for 3 books, contemporary fiction. So I might write about slightly different things or have a different setting, but I don't think I'm actually going to go for cozy crime. However, if I did think of a plot, I might.
Excellent stuff. Well, whatever comes next, we'll all be looking forward to it. Katie Fforde, thank you so much for speaking to us today. It's been an absolute pleasure, and hope to speak to you again very soon.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's been brilliant.
What are your writing dreams? Finishing that book, quitting the day job, becoming a best-selling author? Well, over 4 years, we've studied the advice of over 300 best-selling authors who've collectively sold over 500 million books. And we are excited to announce the Bestseller Academy. If you're ready to take your writing to the next level with accountability, craft, and coaching, your bestseller dreams are now only a click away. To find out more and apply, visit bestsellerexperiment.com/academy. That's bestsellerexperiment.com/academy. Oh, Mark, I tell you what, Mills and Boon, 1908 they started, 1908. And we were doing a bit of research, weren't we, before the podcast. How many books they publish a month?
It's like 100 books a month or something. It's phenomenal. It's just phenomenal.
Bonkers.
Yeah.
Absolutely amazing. And we couldn't actually find out how many books they published in total, but it's got to be in the tens of thousands. It's just
at least
it's one of the most amazing success stories, isn't it? And it also, as like Katie was saying, it opened doors, not just in her writing career, but her pre-writing career. I found it really fascinating that she talked about this idea of having a Mills and Boon novel kind of with her during a daily kind of the daily grind of whatever she was doing. But like she would snatch those moments of escapism, 10 minutes here, 15 minutes there. And she learned quite a lot through that process as well, didn't she?
Yeah, I think what she talked about understanding the addiction. I think that's once you understand what readers want from a book, then you're in a greater position to deliver it. And she said, keep on the point all the time, keep the plot going, keep the page turning. But I think because she loved those books where she was addicted to them, she understood the addiction that made people want to come back for more. And I think one of the greatest lessons you learn as an author once you've been published is that gulf between what the reader expects and what you've delivered. And sometimes those things can be miles apart. And I'm the worst at this. I write, I think, strange books that don't necessarily fit in a slot. But I think if you want to write commercial fiction, you need to marry up what the reader expects with what you're delivering. And if you can do that, then you are off to the races. So, Katie Fforde with her books, she learned her craft in the Mills and Boon stable, this thing of delivering exactly what the reader wants. But she's now with what I call the Katie Fforde Literary Universe, the KFLU. She has now created a world where she's now got her own voice. I think with Mills and Boon, you're not really allowed to develop your own voice. You got to write to a specific kind of tone and style that their readers expect. But once you've put, your name on the cover of the book, and I've got a copy of it here, sent by the publisher. When readers read a Katie Fforde book, they expect to hear her voice and her tone, but one that delivers and gives you a satisfying read every time. And that's a really, really important lesson to learn, I think.
It is. And it's also a really good reminder to everyone and to ourselves that thinking about what makes a great author, and we hear this so many times, it's not just about writing, it's about reading. And it's about reading and reading and reading and reading. And I think in every craft, in every creative form, the more we absorb of other people's work, the more we start to, almost subconsciously understand what makes it tick. And Katie put in, she put in the hours, and she read a lot. And I always think like, great, think of the greatest artists of the world. You think of like people like the Beatles. They didn't invent music. They spent hours and hours playing cover versions of songs before they started writing their own material. And so I think it's a challenge for a lot of writers, though, and it is for me. I'll be honest. Like my working week is insane. Like to snatch a bit of reading, in a daily basis, I have to schedule it. Oh, I mean, maybe I should do Katie's thing and carry a book around with me. But to write a novel is a big undertaking. Reading a book for many people is a big undertaking as well. Like it can take everyone reads at different speeds, and so it takes some people longer to read certain types of novels than others.
Yeah, but I think the other thing that Katie did that was really, really important is she became part of that community. So the RNA is an incredible community. I've been lucky enough to go to the conference a couple of times and do Q&As there and moderate panels. And they are such a lovely bunch. But by hanging out with the folk at the RNA, who are not just writers, they are readers as well. So you are going to discover what readers want from books, what works in books, what delivers, what readers are looking for in fiction. It's constantly evolving, constantly changing. And I think once you're attuned to that, you're much more likely to deliver the kind of book that is going to go like the gangbusters. And I think whatever genre you write in, then you need to figure out what it is that people love about that genre. Can you write that? Can you deliver? I know we all think we're unique little snowflakes and our books are above genre and beyond categorization. But the fact is, if you want to be a commercial author, you've got to start thinking about, okay, how can I develop my voice but still deliver what the readers want and what the mass market wants? And I think if you can do that, then you are golden. But it's there's an element of compromise there, but it doesn't mean you have to be boxed into a little corner. I think there is a sweet spot where you can do both. I'm still figuring that out for myself, though.
And it's interesting as well because Katie also talked about how her perception was maybe she was starting out thinking maybe I can write a less good version of a Mills and Boon's novel. And this idea that thinking that because they are only 50,000 words, they'd be easier to write compared to, and I think she used the word, a normal novel. Yeah, and I thought, really interesting, right? It's really interesting, the perception. And I think what we're learning is it's easier to write a longer novel. It's easier to write, I mean, it's hard to write 200,000 words, but, to write a succinct book in 50,000 words is a real challenge.
Very, very hard.
You have to be, because we do tend to all want to write more. We've always got more words. The day we die, we're always adding more words to our total word count, whether it's spoken, written, or otherwise. And so I think it's really interesting of this perception of, small is easy. It's the reverse. Small is
absolutely
hard.
I mean, in last week's episode with JD Kirk, we talked about the fact that he wrote so many children's books. But writing children's is hard. Writing children's is really hard. I think writing short and sweet romance doubly hard as well. It's not easy. The number of authors. Absolutely. The number of authors I've spoken to who said, I thought I'd knock out a Mills and Boon. And it's really tough, really, really tough. It's a boot camp. It is a boot camp. It should be Mills and Boot Camp is what they should change their name to.
Excellent stuff. Let's talk about the writing kit. I love this idea. Great. I mean, firstly, like everyone's always struggling, like they're going on Amazon looking for a gift to buy somewhere for. I love it when someone sits down and says, okay, what does this what would be really unique, and it will take a little bit of thought and effort into, won't necessarily cost like a ton of money, but let's put together something really thoughtfully planned. I love that. What a great gift from Katie's mum.
Yeah, it was great. I mean, it's basic stuff as well. It's a thesaurus, a dictionary, Tipex, the old paper kind. Do you remember the old paper kind?
I do remember the paper kind,
which was on a ribbon. So it's before the the liquid stuff.
Yeah.
So what's nice is you can actually buy a sort of luxury version from Kate's website. So you get a little
that's inspired.
Yeah, a little book. You got pencils and paper clips and Post-it notes and stuff like that. You can get it personalized. I'll stick a link in the show notes if you want to get that for anyone. It's a really nice kit. But yeah, I mean, you could pop into Smith's and just get people a notepad and pencils and I mean, thesaurus and dictionary you can get online now, but it's always happy to. I've got apps. I've got the Chambers apps, but you can always it's just this thing. If anything else, regardless of the contents, it was in a way her mother just going, I believe in you, and you can do this, and here are the tools of the trade. Not a laptop, not a writing app, expensive writing app, or anything like that. It's just pencils, paper, and the determination to get it done. That's all.
Good old-fashioned writing. And actually, again, following on from last week's, if you missed last week's episode, by the way, you must listen to it. It was really interesting, and honouring Mrs. McAllister, the librarian that gave JD Kirk a little writing pad. Again, they get it's weird in a way, because when it happens, you're just like, oh, that's nice. But then years down the line, when you reflect back and you think, oh, that was the moment, it becomes this like seismic milestone in someone's career, like the moment the librarian gave me a writing pad, the moment my mum gave me a writing kit. So it does have a massive impact on people's lives. So I want to encourage everyone all the writers out there that were looking, like, go and encourage somebody that you believe in who should be writing and maybe isn't. Like maybe pull together some odds and sods and give them a little boost, because, like you say, Mark, the gift represents the confidence, and that has so much value. I was talking yesterday with a client of mine I was coaching, and this idea of external validation, even though we shouldn't have to have it, totally need it as human beings, because we don't believe in ourselves enough. And when somebody else believes in us, it helps us start to believe in ourselves. And so I just think that's a brilliant idea. And I think we can do that in many different ways, not just in writing kits. There's this, if you need to encourage anyone in anything, like, just pull some things together and just give them something beautiful in a basket, whatever it might be. Absolutely love that. The other thing that Katie was talking about was this idea that she would she would give herself an hour a day to write. And I like the idea that she gave herself a specific time, but it was also interesting that once she gave herself that time, it started to stretch, and then it became 2 hours. And again, this is the power of giving yourself permission to write. If you're really busy, folks, and you are not giving yourself permission to write, then make an appointment with yourself. Schedule it like you would do a doctor's appointment. Like, give yourself half an hour, 15 minutes, do the 200-word challenge. Structure it in some way to give yourself, because once you start, then your day will start to move around the writing, and then you might find it starts to increase as well. And I think that's the story of so many authors we've interviewed, isn't it, Marcus? How it started, they started small, and then it became, almost became like an obsession where they would,
Well, she talked about Joe Thomas, who dropped off the kids at nursery, then sat in the car writing. I remember we had Liz Fennick on the podcast many moons ago, who again took that time between dropping the kids off and going to work with the Pomodoro technique, writing for 15, 20 minutes or whatever it was, that tiny gap in the day. I used to write when I was a sales rep driving all over the country. I would write in my lunch break. I'd pull over into a lay-by, scarf down in a lay-by. I haven't heard yet. In a lay-by for non-UK people. That's just, where truckers or whatever, park their cars to have their lunch. So, and I'd scarf down a sandwich and then, just write in, sometimes on a laptop, sometimes a notebook. I had a memory come up the other day as well, on Facebook where, weirdly, I think it's the same trousers I'm wearing now. And this is from about 8 years ago, where I would go on about the fact that I'm writing on a train, but my laptop would run hot. It's those old, pre-Intel MacBooks that got so hot, and I'd burn my thighs, and I'd have these sort of sweaty marks on the top of my thighs where I'd be writing. So, writing on the train, that's probably more information than anyone needs.
They didn't ever catch fire, did they, Mark?
No, my one didn't. No. But,
that would have been something.
Just find the time. There is, I know people lead incredibly busy lives, but if you can find that 20 minutes, it makes all the difference.
And actually, going back to the mum that dropped the kids off, we had someone, I remember early on in the podcast, that told us that they would go, they'd have a notepad in the car, and if they'd go to pick up the kids, and they'd maybe get there 10 minutes early, and they'd be writing and scrabbling as many words and just snatching the time. I love the idea though of doing it, like this idea of doing it when you drop the kids off before you get home. Because we all know this, right? The minute you walk through the front door, it's like to do the essential,
dishwasher,
right? It's
vacuum,
and that's why, and that's another thing that a lot of people have discovered with COVID, and we both knew this. And me having worked from home for now 25 years, I do have to leave the home. I have to leave the home sometimes just to do some work. And that's why it's so important. Like, go to your local library, go to a cafe, stay in the school car park and write your 15 minutes and then go home. Because then you're banking those words, you're getting them done. And whatever happens in your day, no matter how chaotic the rest of your day is, you've written something and you can take that to bed that night and go, I actually created something outside of just crossing things off a to-do list. Because I think we need that in our day. The busier we get, the more we can struggle with the monotony of the chores of life, as I call them. And writing is that moment where you actually say to yourself, I'm going to gift this time to myself. Writing is a gift to yourself in many ways. And by allowing yourself to do that, you're recharging yourself. You're saying, my creative needs, my creative wants matter in amongst all the busy needs of everyone else in the family, in the world. I need to nurture this and I need to recharge myself. So this is a really important thing just from a mental health perspective as well. And so I really, really, this week, challenge everyone. Go join a 200-word challenge if you haven't started that. If you're doing it, if you started it, you maybe fell off the wagon, start it up again. Do a couple of days. But find the time in your day to do it. It's not just about, I'll see if I can write today. It's like, pick an event that happens every single day and then follow it with your writing. And that way you anchor the two together. And anyone who's kind of studied habits knows that's how it works. So yeah, it's just a really good reminder, isn't it, Mark?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So folks, we've got a lot more that we'd like to chat, and you can join us on this week's extended edition of the podcast where we are going to cover all kinds of interesting things, including celebrity book deals.
Oh yeah. We're going to do it. We're going to go there.
We're going to go there, folks. It's going to be absolutely fascinating. And we're also going to talk about perceptions of success as well, about, looking at other authors around us and measuring their success against ours. And Mark's going to also kind of deep dive us on tips for historical fiction writing. So if that is your jam, then pop along to bestsellerexperiment.com/support and sign up to become a patron of the podcast to get access to the extended stay. So, Mark, tell us about this week's incredible wins.
Oh my gosh, how long have you got? How long?
I've got
seriously,
all day, mate, all day.
I don't think we've had a week like this. This is quite breathtaking. Okay, I'm going to start with a lovely, easy one. Okay, so Inkborn Blade on Twitter, who has been on the 200 words a day writing challenge for as long as I can remember. At Inkborn Blade, he said, I did it. 500 days of the 200 words a day writing challenge as coined by the bestseller experiment. He says, I'll put a blog post up about it soon. But there's no way I'd have written 222,000 words, 222000, in the same time without it. Without exaggeration, it's changed the way I write for good. I mean, Mr. D, come on. Let's salute Inkborn Blade there. It's just incredible. Absolutely brilliant.
Brilliant. So delighted for you.
Now, wins. Lynn Clark, member of the Academy. In the past, she's part of the BXP team as well. She says, I've been okay to tell everyone who will listen that I've got a ghost story accepted for the Curious Blue Press anthology December Tales 2. Never had anything accepted before, so I'm pleased as punch and rather bemused. Lynn, this is, Lynn's writing is just fantastic. I've seen it in the Academy. Lynn is a legend in the making. So this is the beginning of something amazing. So when that comes out, Lynn, let us know about it. We will plug the socks off it. I'm just so happy for Lynn that this has happened. This is absolutely brilliant.
Congratulations, Lynn.
Anne Woodward, also in the Academy. And this, again, great news. So Anne Woodward says, I entered the Val Wood Prize in 2022 and it all went quiet and I got on with my writing life. 2 weeks ago, I received an email apologising for the delay in awarding the prize. There had been technical difficulties and telling me the results would be announced soon. On Friday, I received a follow-up email congratulating me on my win. I'd won the Yorkshire Prize of the competition, which was just for writers living or born in Yorkshire and whose story was set in Yorkshire. As this is the first competition I've ever won, I'm a bit chuffed. And I'm going to put a link in the show notes so you can read Anne's short story. That is absolutely brilliant. Congratulations, Anne.
Yeah, and it's so huge. We can't say enough how important these milestones are. Winning or getting nominated, shortlisted, whatever it might be. It makes such a massive difference to building your self-belief. So congratulations, Anne. We're absolutely chuffed for you.
Talking about making a huge difference. So Susie Edge, who's been on with the deep dive before, talking about how amazing she is on TikTok. Okay. And she's going to be on the podcast later in the year because I'm getting her on for a second book. And Susie is a big supporter of the podcast in the BXP team and on Patreon. Susie said, "Are you sitting down? Because I have some news. I've been longlisted by TikTok as BookTok Author of the Year."
That is insane.
It's incredible.
That's huge. BookTok is like the biggest thing in the world right now.
Massive. Yeah.
To be on longlisted for the BookTok list of authors, that is utterly nuts.
It's crazy, isn't it? Absolutely crazy. So, Susie, huge congratulations. Hopefully we'll have some news by the time we get you back on the podcast and we can talk about the whole roller coaster ride of that and whatever happens with that. It's just astonishing. Now, you're going to love this one, Mr. D. We've had some incredible follow-up from the J.D. Kirk episode, and thanks to everyone who's been in touch about that. One, Zoe Richards, who, again, has joined us on the 200 Words a Day Challenge as well. Thanks for joining us on that, Zoe. Zoe says, "I've been listening to the Bestseller Experiment podcast on the dog walk and discovered from a tangent conversation," that's a polite way of saying part of our waffle, I think, Mr. D, a tangent conversation like they had, that it's not common to be able to block off your sense of smell. I can do this. Can you? Weird that people can't do this. Mr. D, you're not alone. There's another one with your superpowers. Zoe. It's like you and Zoe. You could form the Avengers or something. Yeah.
We have to form a club and give it a name. Absolutely brilliant. Well, Zoe, welcome. Welcome to the club. I don't quite know where we go from here, but it's good to know I'm not alone. That's for certain.
Right. More follow-up from Nijar Alam, who is at Nijar Alam Writes on Twitter. Says, "Another great episode, and I love that I'm not the only one who loves jigsaw puzzles, especially booked-themed ones. Here's one for your collection." And it's a lovely one with a cat and books. And so, Mr. D, again, you're not alone with the jigsaw puzzles either. People out there are loving the jigsaw puzzles. Thanks for that, Nijar. Right. Now, these last two, I don't know which one to do first. I'm going to do this one first because this is such good news. This is amazing news. So our friend of the podcast, long-time supporter of the podcast, Andrew Chapman. You remember Andrew Chapman, The Mask Collector was the book that he wrote in 24 hours. It was based on a screenplay. He'd written a screenplay and he wrote it in 24 hours. I'll put a link in the show notes so you can listen to the episode where we interviewed Andrew about that. It was an astonishing achievement. Okay, right? Andrew, just a couple of days ago, said, "I've been dying to share the news that The Mask Collector has a director attached for months and I can finally talk about it. And The Mask Collector is on its way to the big screen." And he put a picture of him and director Steve McCartan just sharing a pint each. This is how it starts, man. This is how it starts. So,
okay, rewind. So how did this even happen?
Well,
is it all a mystery?
It's maybe we need to get Andrew back on at some point to talk about this. But the truth is, I read the screenplay of this when it was originally a screenplay, and it's an absolutely cracking, high concept thriller. Okay, yeah. It's terrific. This guy's rob a bank, and one of the people in the bank is a serial killer. Boom. It's just terrific. So great script. Adapted it into a terrific little book. And now he's got a director attached. So this is Andrew making it happen, absolutely making it happen. So huge congrats.
Well, watch this space, folks. We will keep you up to date on how that progresses.
Yeah, just fantastic news. Right, and this last one just blew me away. So, this is where do we even start? This is just astonishing because we had J.D. Kirk on the show last week, and he was talking about the fact that he has this condition where he doesn't have kind of an inner kind of can't visualize things, aphantasia. Okay, this thing called aphantasia, where he said, like, if you said to me, count sheep in my head or visualize a blue ball, he just couldn't do it. And he was astonished to find that this was a thing. He thought everyone was like this, but so anyway, and we said to people, look, if you think this is you, here's a link in the show notes, check it out. You're not alone, kind of thing. And so Edward Kane, who is at Nihilus on Twitter, he started a thread. He was like, "Holy, I think you just changed my life." And J.D. Kirk said, "In a good way, I hope." And Edward says, I always thought I was dumb. I mean, I was told so in school, but now I think I understand why I'm terrible at giving directions because I can't picture it. And this explains why I can't describe a thing, but when I sit down to write it, I can come up with the imagery. Thank you. And JD says, oh God, giving directions is my personal hell. And being given directions, it's an odd moment when you learn a new thing about yourself, isn't it? Glad you found it useful. Edward says, a while ago, my wife tried to help me with how I often leave out descriptions in my writing by asking what I see when I read books. I never thought about it prior, but I don't picture anything. I read the words. Sometimes I see vague impressions of people in white rooms. It's why I found writing comics so fun and interesting. It seems to work better for my brain because I can imagine what a page looks like. The gutters and such help my brain so much. And JD said, it's interesting that we both write comics, which is a visual medium. Edward said, I find it easier than prose, but I always think I'm describing too much and it's boring in prose, but then people read it and say, I don't know what's happening, but with comics, there are set parameters. But anyway, Edward says, I must say that aphantasia explains why I've written several stories where the world around the characters disappear and they wander through blankness. It's fascinating how subconscious works. And he says, I wish I could hug you guys because this explains a lot. He says, I'm more hypophantasia, which is a reduced level, but not completely absent mental imagery. It's why many of my stories don't work. Setting is usually absent because when I read books, I don't see imagery. And I said to Ed, look, is this going to help you moving forward? He said, I had been thinking of giving up on prose because I've written some stories that I believe were sure to land somewhere and they haven't. But now I understand better and I feel rejuvenated. I know where the wall is and I understand so much more about myself now. And he says, I feel like the secrets of the universe have been unlocked. And he spoke to his brother about it and he described something similar. So it runs in the family as well. Now, I've had the pleasure of working on Ed's stuff as a kind of consultant and editor and giving him feedback. He's a terrific writer. I mean, make no bones about this. Ed is a terrific, great imagination, great characterizations, what have you. But the fact that he's discovered this now and unlocked this, I really hope, like he says, it's unlocked the universe for him. Ed, I really hope this encourages you to keep writing and to overcome that barrier and to make something out of it and use JD as a kind of a template for what you could possibly be. But that's phenomenal, isn't it?
It's absolutely mind blowing. And the last week's episode with JD Kirk, to inspire Ed, it's JD's superpower. Isn't it? It's Barry's superpower.
I know we have to be careful. Whenever someone has, you don't want to describe people with autism as having a superpower or what have you. You don't want to trivialize it, but it kind of is.
Not at all. But I think the key thing is once you understand what it is, you can use it in so many powerful ways.
You make it work for you. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah,
it's fantastic.
Yeah. So Ed, thanks so much for allowing us to share. I checked with Ed; he was okay with us sharing it, and I just think it's why we do this podcast, man. If we can change someone's life, that's amazing.
Absolutely brilliant. And thank you to everyone for all the incredible good news this week.
What a week.
Fills us up. So, whilst out in the big wide world, as we start this podcast, there's all this bad stuff happening. This is the bit where we try and counterbalance it with all your great news. So if you have something to celebrate, it doesn't matter how big or small you think it is, we want to hear about it. Pop over to bestsellerexperiment.com. Go to the contact tab and drop Mark and I a note. We read all the emails that come in and we do try and, mention everyone that reaches out. So thank you again. And whilst you're on the website, folks, if you'd like to get an update of all the amazing things that we've been learning each week on the podcast and what you might benefit from, please sign up to the newsletter. Click on the newsletter tab there. There's also, of course, the 200wordchallenge.com, which we've mentioned a number of times today. So if you're curious about what that is, it's a free challenge. Can you start by writing 7 days consecutively of 200 words, and then a few more days, and then a few more, maybe a month, and maybe a year, and then you might get to, and then you might get to 220,000 words, right? So absolutely brilliant. Mark, for people that want to contact us via social media.
Yes, we're on Facebook, Bestseller Experiment. Twitter and Instagram is @BestsellerXP. And if you've been inspired by this episode, by Katie, by JD, by any of our guests, or even us, give us a rating, subscribe, do all those things. And listen, I'm serious about this. Tell your friends, all right? Talk about us in writing groups. I don't know. we seem to be like the best kept secret on social media. People who like the podcast really like the podcast, but seem to be reluctant to tell other people about it. So do tell all your writer friends. We get so much great feedback, but we need more people to listen to us, frankly, because
absolutely.
I think
the more the merrier, right?
Absolutely. Tell your friends.
Invite them to the party, folks. So brilliant, folks. Thanks so much for listening, and until next week, it's a goodbye from Mark 1
and a goodbye from Mark 2. Tatty bye.
Goodbye.
Bye.